It was an average Tuesday, one of those days where I almost felt guilty for being content. The sun filtered through the trees lining Elm Street, casting dappled shadows over my front yard, which I had lovingly cultivated into a mini urban jungle. As a civil rights attorney, my usual workdays are filled with complex legal battles and tension-filled negotiations. But today, all I was looking forward to was a quiet evening at home. I settled into my favorite armchair, the one that shaped my body just right after years of unyielding loyalty. My phone buzzed restlessly against a pile of legal briefs on my coffee table. A text from my best friend Michael flashed across the screen. "Are you ready for the big neighborhood meeting tonight?" Ah, yes, the monthly HOA meeting where Susan Hartley, the self-proclaimed keeper of community standards, reigned supreme. This woman had turned protesting into an art form, and I was pretty sure she needed a fanfare as she stepped into the spotlight. My heart sank just thinking about it. All she wanted was to ensure everyone's property values stayed pristine, but her form of activism crossed the line. Before I could sink back into my moment of peace, there was a loud knock at the door, echoing through my house. I stood up, looked through the peephole, and sighed deeply. It was Susan, eyes ablaze, flailing her arms in a performance that seemed to require significant practice. How incredible, I thought, that someone could be so compelled by their sense of entitlement that they'd visit unannounced just to lay down absurd complaints. I twisted the doorknob and opened the door, bracing for impact. "Mr. Carter, we need to talk," she demanded, pointing a manicured finger toward my face like a chicken directing traffic. "Goodness, Susan, I'm home. Not prepared for battle," I replied, folding my arms to take a stand. She ignored my comment and instead unleashed her frustration. "I'm calling a lawyer to demand you vacate your home. My son and his family need this space." "Excuse me?" The words barely registered. "Vacate? You want me to move out of my own house? On what grounds?" Amateur dramatics. I sensed her fury boiling as she launched into a long-winded tirade about her son Thomas and how he was somehow too good to live in a regular house. "He needs a place to call home, and quite frankly, I believe you're just squatting here." My jaw dropped. "Squatting? Susan, I have a deed, and last I checked, it wasn't signed by you." Susan huffed, not appearing even slightly perturbed by my legal rebuttal. "You'll see, James. I'm reaching out to my lawyer. You'll regret ignoring me when Thomas and his family are trying to find their footing after moving back from overseas." "Overseas?" I scoffed. "Didn't they just return from a luxury cruise?" "Don't be petty. This is about family," she insisted, growing increasingly animated. I could hardly keep my composure. "Susan, you do realize that family doesn't equate to property rights, right? That might work in your bizarre universe, but not in mine." But before I could carry on with my point, she retreated with an air of self-satisfaction. "Mark my words, you'll be hearing from my lawyer. You need to pack up and move on." She turned on her heel dramatically, making the exit as theatrical as her entrance. Behind her, I could see her husband Robert standing awkwardly by the curb, clipboard in hand, like a morose accountant witnessing an unfortunate sales meeting. Lucky guy. As soon as I closed the door, I fell back into my chair, shaking with incredulous laughter. "Next time I'm at the gala," I muttered, "I'll bring a bow and arrow and maybe I'll beware of Susan's sign." Michael called me, buoyantly curious. "Dude, are you ready for the meeting tonight?" I couldn't contain my astonishment. "You wouldn't believe what just happened. Susan thinks her son has a divine right to my house." "Are you serious?" he chuckled. "What's her plan, my way or the highway?" "Well, if she could force me out legally, she would," I joked. "But I'm pretty sure that would be against every law known to man." I blew off some steam while pacing my home, preparing for the HOA meeting. Little did I know that this evening would turn into an experience I could have never anticipated. As the evening rolled around, I arrived at the community center. A group of residents were already gathered, exchanging cordialities. But the second my eyes landed on Susan, clad in yet another ostentatious outfit that screamed, "I'm here for drama," I couldn't help but wonder how this would play out. "And let me remind you all," Susan was declaring, "that community integrity hinges on property values. We are all a family here, and we must look out for one another." "Aha, one family," I thought, eyeing her as she spoke with heightened insistence. "But only if you fit her criteria for perfection." As the meeting commenced, I could feel the tension creeping into the room, readying itself for the inevitable confrontation. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood and addressed the group, maintaining a measured tone. Good evening, everyone. While I appreciate all your hard work to maintain a healthy community, I began, catching the League of Susan's followers eyeing me suspiciously. I first must address the recent encounter with Miss Hartley. I'd like to assure you that her demands for me to vacate my house are utterly unsubstantiated. I elaborated, feeling the weight of their eyes upon me. But Susan was ready for action. James, you are ruining the spirit of family. Thomas is a man who deserves better than to live among junk. Junk? I replied incredulously. You mean me? You're welcome to come visit any time and see how I live. I've got an espresso machine that would change your life. Laughter erupted throughout the community center as some attendees stifled their chuckles behind their hands. This was quickly turning into a spectacle, and I couldn't help but stress how absurd things had become. I will call my lawyer, she threatened dramatically, waving her arm in a sweeping gesture of defiance. Please do. I leaned forward. I would love to have an entertaining chat about squatters' rights and property laws, but I'll tell you this. Your son is not my problem. Susan's eyes simmered with palpable intensity, and there was something oddly satisfying about the entire exchange. I was not going to back down. A week passed since the meeting. I expected Susan to cool down, but instead, every time she saw me, she would mutter passive-aggressive remarks or send her husband to question why my lawn was an affront to humanity. Then, one afternoon, as I retrieved my mail, I was greeted with an official-looking document. My heart raced as I opened it. Susan had indeed followed through with her threats and hired a lawyer. The letter outlined her demands that I vacate the premises within 30 days, claiming that family needs trumped the selfishness of ownership. Oh, this is going to be fun, I grinned, the wheels of revenge beginning to turn. After gathering the details of what would be a delightful showdown, I sought assistance from my own lawyer, Elizabeth, a sharp, no-nonsense kind of woman who thrived in outrageous legal battles. This will be a monumental waste of time for her, she said, rolling her eyes as we examined the case. But I can't just sit back and let her think she can bully me, I insisted. Elizabeth nodded, a smirk forming on her lips. You could counter her demands and add a few points of your own, like how her social faux pas have created a negative impact on community relationships. With a plan in motion, I responded to Susan's unsolicited eviction notice, outlining my defense while peppering in some well-placed jabs about her inadequate understanding of property laws and her continued overstepping of boundaries. As the gears of bureaucracy spun into motion, I could sense that I was ready for battle. Days turned into weeks as the paperwork continued to spiral. The neighborhood buzzed with curiosity over the bizarre legal spat. People whispered in hushed tones, often stopping to check on me, offering support and sympathy. Finally, the day we were all waiting for arrived. I stood across from Susan and her lawyer, a pompous-looking man with a clipboard who resembled a disgruntled owl. Gone were the days of vague threats. We were officially in the throes of a legal battle. Your Honor, Susan's lawyer began dramatically. My client wishes to reclaim her family's rightful place in this property, which she believes is essential for her son's well-being. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes, knowing I was about to shine a light on the absurdity of the claims. Objection, Your Honor, I piped in, shooting a glance at the judge, who had been skillfully holding back amusement. The judge raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. Proceed, Mr. Carter. Susan's son, from what I understand, is residing in a luxurious penthouse downtown with space for a family that he voluntarily left to come back to this community, I explained, raising my voice just enough for the room to give me their full attention. His situation is a personal choice, not one that obligates me to move out of my own properly purchased property. Sources? Susan's lawyer challenged, glancing down at his notes. Let's just say I've dealt with this family long enough to know where they actually reside, I said with a grin. The courtroom burst into laughter, the judge even chuckling. Moments later, Susan shifted in her seat, fuming with embarrassment. But of course, this wasn't the end. Susan's lawyer attempted to hammer down a few more points, but every one of his arguments landed flat, while the courtroom bubbled with unexpected delights. Finally, the judge made her decision. After hearing both sides, it is clear that Miss Hartley is misguided and that there are no legal grounds for her family's claim. Case dismissed. This is a ludicrous use of the court's time. As the gavel dropped, I felt the weight of victory wash over me. I looked over at Susan, who had gone pale, her mouth agape in disbelief. After the ruling, News of Susan's failed attempt to evict me spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. The spectacle morphed into yet another one of those wild tales people couldn't resist sharing at the next HOA gathering. The twist: Susan unleashed a new tirade against her neighbors, blaming them for failing to support her noble endeavors. Instead of learning her lesson, she somehow convinced herself that it was the community failing her, not the other way around. "Your Honor, the community is clearly against us," she declared incessantly to anyone who would listen. Her continuous antics rendered her a neighborhood figure of ridicule. I spotted her frenetic energy, flaring in all the wrong places. My neighbors and I watched as she spiraled into a life of melodrama and absurd encounters, steadfast in her belief that someone, somewhere, had wronged her. But me, I found solace in the lessons I had learned through the chaos. This saga turned into a humorous reflection on the absurdity of entitlement. Not only had I squared off against an unlikely antagonist, but I had also turned an outrageous venture into a testament of resilience, a humorous yet pointed reminder that owning a home isn't just about the bricks and mortar, it's about the community that surrounds you. Life returned to its normal pace, but the stories of Susan prevailed, continuing to serve as a warning to homeowners across Glenwood Clare. If you infuriated a judge with nonsense, no one was safe from the delightful tides of retribution. And for that, I wouldn't trade my home or my neighbors for anything in the world. After the tumultuous courtroom drama that saw Susan Hartley's ludicrous eviction attempt dismissed, I thought life in Glenwood Clare would return to some semblance of normalcy. The neighborhood had rallied around me, sharing stories of their own encounters with Susan's outrageous antics, and laughter filled the air where tense silence once prevailed. As a civil rights attorney, I prided myself on my ability to handle difficult situations. Yet, despite the newfound camaraderie among my neighbors, one undeniable truth lingered: Susan was far from finished. Rather than learn from her legal debacle, she seemed fueled with an unquenchable thirst for chaos. Each time I stepped out of my house, I sensed her lurking presence, embittered by her defeat and more volatile than ever. Each morning, I kept my routine consistent: the gym, followed by a quick stop at the local coffee shop for my usual espresso. But one fateful day, I detected an unsettling vibe. As I walked back home after my workout, the air was thick with tension, and an unusual silence settled over the neighborhood. The birds seemed to stop singing, observing the impending storm about to break. As I approached my house, every instinct screamed for caution. I could see Susan standing in front of my porch, her familiar blonde hair glinting in the sunlight as she paced erratically, like a lioness preparing to pounce. Behind her, I noticed her husband Robert standing awkwardly with an expression of caught embarrassment. "There's my favorite neighbor," she shrieked, turning abruptly, arms flailing as the accusation rushed out in a volley. "I've been waiting for you, James. You think you can just go on living your life after that courtroom defeat? Really, Susan? More theatrics?" I left my Oscar acceptance speech at home. I shot back, a sarcastic grin playing on my lips. "What is this? A rehash of your last performance?" Because I was told there would be no encore, but she wasn't in the mood for banter. "Enough of your jokes, James. You need to leave." This was supposed to be my son's home already. Her emotions were spiraling, and I could see she was ready to draw blood if provoked. I hesitated, eyeing her closely. "Let's not pretend that emotional theatrics carry weight here, Susan. You know you can't have my house." Susan clenched her fists, her face transforming into a grotesque mask of rage. "You will regret this," she screamed, stepping forward aggressively. I took a step back, facing her directly. "Honestly, you have no power here. Let's try to keep this civil before it all spirals out of control again." But her expression shifted from anger to sheer determination. "Civil? You think this is about civility? Get off my property," she shouted, lunging toward me as if I were a bullseye. Startled, I instinctively raised my hands to defend myself. "Wait, S." Before I could complete my thought, she had closed the gap with a shove. She barreled into me, sending me stumbling backward onto my porch. The moment felt surreal. Susan had crossed a line I never thought she would dare to cross. Robert stood frozen, whispering a mantra of "not again" under his breath. As the absurdity of the encounter escalated, I quickly regained my balance, realizing that I needed to de-escalate this before things spiraled wildly out of control. "Susan, stop it," I shouted through the chaos. "You've got to calm down. This isn't how adults handle conflict." but her eyes were lit with a manic ferocity, and she suddenly lunged again, this time attempting to knock the phone from my hand as I dialed 911, voice shaking. "I'll show you what it means to be a neighbor, James. You can't take me for granted." The situation escalated in mere seconds. As I steadied myself after dodging her attempt, I raised my phone. "I'm calling the authorities. You need to back off before you really regret this." "That's it. Call them. I'm not afraid of you, nor am I afraid of the police," she bellowed, her hands shaking and flailing about. Just as I hit the call button, she dove toward me again, this time with open hands. I dodged again, trying to return to the safety of my entryway, but the door swung shut too fast. At that moment, I heard the sound of tires screeching on asphalt, and within moments, a cruiser appeared on the scene, its lights flashing like a disco party in broad daylight. As the officer stepped out, I pointed urgently in Susan's general direction. "That's her. She attacked me." The officers, two veteran sergeants who had probably seen it all, approached with a blend of caution and skepticism. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, eyeing the chaos that had unfolded on my porch. "Susan just tried to assault me. She barged into my space." "This is insane," I exclaimed, gesturing toward her as she stood omnipotently in front of me, echoing exaggerated gasps and glances of anger. "Assault?" she echoed, incredulity dripping from her tone. No, I was merely asking him to respect my family's wishes. He's the one who needs to step off his high horse." "Ma'am," the officer calmly addressed her, "let's take a step back and assess the situation." But Susan, obstinate as ever, refused to relent. "You're not listening to me. He's a squatter, and I demand the police remove him from my property. My son needs a home." "Susan," Robert piped up nervously from the sidelines, "I think we need to calm down and resolve this." "Calm down," she screeched, fuming like a volcano threatening to erupt. "He just attacked me, and now you're making excuses for that man." The officers exchanged glances, clearly struggling to suppress their disbelief at the absurdity. "Ma'am," one officer said cautiously, "can you step over here with us?" At that moment, I felt vindicated. I pointed at Susan while raising my eyebrows into matching spurts of disbelief. "See? Those who attack are always the loudest." As the officers ushered her away to get the story straight, I took a breath, relief coursing through me, but the drama wasn't over just yet. While the officers listened to Susan's exaggerated version of events, a blend of untruths and inflated claims, I watched as Robert pulled his phone out, attempting to record their interaction, as if he expected the incident would lead to a defense. I shook my head, knowing that nobody, absolutely nobody, would take her side in this dance of insanity. Susan had managed to turn herself into the worst possible version of a villain, and the police were well trained in dealing with neighborhood disputes among foes disguised as friends. "Ma'am, you're going to need to stop this," one of the sergeants finally stated. "If he claims you attempted to assault him, and it certainly looks that way, we may have to take you in for further questioning." "What?" Susan's eyes bulged, seemingly in disbelief. "I'm not going to jail. I just wanted that man to cower," I said incredulously, shaking my head. "This isn't a game. It's a matter of legality. Do you even think one person can overpower someone legally residing in a home?" But alas, Susan only seemed agitated. "You haven't seen the last of me," she shrieked defiantly, her voice echoing through the neighborhood. Within moments, as I watched the officer pull out the handcuffs, I realized how futile it was for Susan to believe she could bully her way into getting her demands met. The officers were completely unfazed as they expertly maneuvered around her flailing arms. "Ma'am, we are going to need you to cooperate," the sergeant said. "We can resolve this peacefully, but if you try to resist, things will get much worse." Eventually, she spun around like a whirling dervish as they cuffed her. I couldn't help but smirk. "Susan, no matter how hard you try, the world doesn't revolve around you," I stated, feeling a sense of irony flicker in the air as she was led away into the cruiser. The neighborhood blended back into focus, a chorus of curious residents gathering to witness her fall from grace. I couldn't help but savor the scene, my once embattled foe now reduced to bewilderment as the police car door slammed shut. Robert stood immobilized, appearing like a sheep without a shepherd, burdened with the knowledge that his wife's latest escapade would echo through the community for years to come. After the police finished up their report and exchanged a few more glances with me, I felt a strange sense of triumph. "What can I say?" I said, Some people just can't comprehend boundaries. In the aftermath, neighbors gathered and expressed their support. Laughter rang through the air, and several offered their condolences. Once again, Susan shows us the type of person she really is, James chimed in. Someone mentioned organizing a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate the end of Susan's chaotic reign, and almost immediately, excitement erupted in the crowd. Let's host it at your place, Michael suggested, clapping me on the back and grinning widely. We might as well put your house to better use. I could only laugh as we began to strategize and put plans into place. The threat of Susan momentarily abated as spring turned to summer, and life in Glenwood Clare resumed its rhythm. There was a newfound spirit coursing through the veins of our community. We leaned on each other, supporting one another amidst the laughter and triumph of the shared experience. Despite Susan's attempts to disrupt the harmony, I realized she had only brought us closer together. Who knew an attempted assault could bring about so much solidarity? Life continued, and I settled into the quiet rhythm of days filled with sunshine, friendship, and caring neighbors, a far better home life than I ever could have imagined. Free from the grasp of a disgruntled Susan. In the end, I found solace in community, and laughter reigned supreme as another chapter in the chaotic world of Glenwood Clare came to a close, reminding us all just how resilient a neighborhood can be when faced with absurdity. Hey,